Oh, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I'll do that. All right. That's the best introduction I've ever had because you'd rather get on with it anyway than to have some kind of a long introduction and half the stuff you forget about 2 seconds after it's said. It's good to be with you today. I've been on somewhat of a circuit talking about classic TV for the last 2 years. And it started out with a group from the hospital, and then I've been going to groups like yours and other civic clubs, churches, other organizations, seniors groups, and it's a little bit wistful for me today because the last one of these I did was 2 months ago at Calvary Baptist Church with the seniors at that church that was led by Conrad Delaney, who we all miss so greatly. And it's been a little difficult for some of us who knew him because of our connection in broadcasting. It's been difficult for us to process these last few hours. But one thing we're thankful about, he left us with so many wonderful memories and so many great stories. Just about anybody who's ever been in broadcasting has great stories. My favorite Conrad Delaney story, though, is when some of you who've been here a long time may remember a gentleman named Neil Michael, who used to host a show on WTJS called Swap and Shop. It was really your flea market of the air. People could call in, buy, sell, trade, anything. I think there's still a show in Crockett County on radio that goes by that same name. And so Neil hosted it, and then after Neil tragically passed away in an automobile accident, then Conrad took over as the host of the show. But anybody who's ever been in broadcasting is guilty of mischief, and happily so. You admit to it. And so one day, when Neil Michael was hosting Swap and Shop, Conrad was in another studio, and he just got a wild hair and decided that he would call in to the show from the other studio. And he did. Disguised his voice. Now, that's hard for Conrad Delaney to disguise his voice because he was so distinctive, but Conrad disguised his voice. And so he calls in, and he said, I've got a late model car. It's this is probably 1992. He says, it's a 1988. It's a Ford. It's real clean interior, and it's white. And he keeps all this description going on. And he said, I'd like to get a call from anybody who wants to buy it. And so he gives the number. And the number, turns out it was Neil Michael's phone number. And all of a sudden, Neil's phone started. Now, this is before we had cell phones, but Neil's number at home starts ringing off. His wife is answering the phone, and she has no idea what's going on. We're not selling any cars. Well, they said you were on the radio. And this keeps going on and on and on. Finally, at the end of the show, Conrad calls in, and he says, is this Neil Michael? And he said, yes, it is. It's Swap and Shop. He says, Neil Michael, I just want to tell you something. This is Conrad Delaney. I'm over in the other studio. I just sold your car. Only Conrad. But I love that story. I want to share with you a couple of stories, and I'm going to play some trivia with you for a few minutes before you all have to go today. And I always like to do that to wrap things up. So mine's not going to be about Tennessee trivia. It'll be about TV trivia. There's some people in this room, see, if you want to know what begins to make me feel old, I have a former student who is in here. My first class at Union University, Vanessa, is in my class. And now I look at her today, she has not changed one bit. I have deteriorated rapidly. So...
And I always called you Dr. Beverly, and you kept telling me I'm Mr. Beverly, but I still think of you as Dr. Beverly.
I'll write you a prescription after
Yeah.
that. Yeah. I love seeing Vanessa. She was just a dear, and I just love my students, and I still do. I'm in my 26th year at Union, and that's one of the greatest things about it, is the young people keep the fire in the belly, and they keep me feeling young. I'm not going to be doing it too many more years, but It's just a joy to see them as they progress in life and their careers. I wanted to share with you a few things about TV history, and people wanted to know, how did you get into this after doing this show on Channel 6 for the last 8 years? Well, how did you get into interest? I frankly think I was a TV historian from the time I was 4 years old, because I was part of the TV generation. Now today, they're part of the digital generation. They couldn't care less today about CBS, ABC, or NBC. All they care about is when they want to watch it, whenever they want to watch it, what they want, when they want it, and they couldn't care less if somebody gives you a show at 10 o'clock on Tuesday night, they'll watch it whenever they want to. But that's all we had. Somebody asked me about this. Why? One of my students did an interview with me, and they asked, why is it that for your generation, that a lot of these classic TV shows mean so much? I said, well, you got to remember, a lot of us grew up in towns that only had one station available. A few had 2 or 3. If you were in the really mega cities, you had some independent stations, but most of us, we had 1 or 2 stations, and that was it. And so that's all we had. And these shows meant a lot to us because we didn't have 1,000 choices. We didn't have Netflix, Hulu, and everything else out there, and so many of these shows are going to be forgettable real quick. I just wanted to spend a little time today as a TV historian sharing with you a few stories about a couple of people that just for me, they're some of my favorites to talk about. I went to the 50th anniversary back in 2001. In fact, it was just 2 weeks before we had 9/11. I went to the 50th anniversary Loving Lucy convention out in Burbank, California. I was brought in as a consultant because they did a stage game show that had Lucy trivia with the audience. And so they had a panel discussion with some of the writers who were still living at that time, as well as some of the performers who had worked with people on the show. So they did a panel on the Mertzes. And I always thought Fred and Ethel Mertz, if you hadn't had them, as funny as Lucy was, if you hadn't had Fred and Ethel, I Love Lucy wouldn't have been I Love Lucy. And my favorite of the 2 of them, though, was Bill Frawley. Fred Mertz, I mean, the ultimate curmudgeon, the biggest tightwad character that we've ever had on television. I don't care what Jack Benny said, Fred Mertz was tighter. And here was the deal. They had cast Fred Mertz, Bill Frawley. At the time, he was 64 years old. So they cast him. They had not cast Ethel. So somebody told Desi Arnaz and one of the directors, Mark Daniels, that there is a woman who's playing in a play out at La Jolla, California. And her name is Vivian Vance. We think you ought to take a look at her. She might be a good Ethel. So they went out and they looked at her, they brought her in, and they said, okay, let's bring her in to meet Lucy. So she came in the following Monday morning, and she and Lucy had never met. And they wanted to see if there was chemistry between the 2 of them, or if it was just something that was not going to work. So they brought them in, and they had this conversation, and Lucy and Vivian were hitting it off pretty well. They had a good icebreaker. And so she said, well, now tell me something. Who's going to play the husband of Ethel Mertz? And Lucy said, well, we've hired Bill Frawley to play that. And she said, you mean that old coot? You've hired him to play the husband? And what she didn't know is Frawley was right outside the door. And he heard it all, and he gave no quarter as to his reactions to anything. And he walks in the, rah, 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 what are you talking about, an old coot? And he just goes off the deep end about it. The writers for the show who were on that panel, Madeline Davis and Bob Carroll Jr., who both passed away since then, but they said, because of that, they wrote the characters of the Mertzes around the relationship that was so tense between the 2 of them because they never got along. That day, also on the panel, was an actress named Patricia Barry. She's somebody whose face you would recognize, but probably you wouldn't know her name because she was never a regular on a successful series, but she played on many, more than 100 television shows and episodes. And so in the early years of My Three Sons, and some of you may remember in the black and whites of My Three Sons, Bill Frawley played Bub. He was before Uncle Charlie on that show. So Bill Frawley is playing on that show. And in the first 2 years, they would bring in Patricia Barry every few episodes to be a love interest for Fred McMurray, who was the father. And so the interesting thing about this is that she said, I began to really like him. I saw through all the gruff exterior, and she said, so my husband and I we adopted him. And they started, because his health was beginning to fail a little bit, and they started taking him to different places. And so they got one night to a testimonial dinner, and it was valet parking. And they got out of the car, and Frawley started right off, and he said, valet parking. We're going to come into this place and we're going to pay $75 a plate for this testimonial dinner, and then you expect us to pay you to park the car? Valet parking. I hate valet parking. In fact, I hate valet parking as bad as I hate Vivian Vance. He did not like her for some reason. And one of the other stories that goes along with that is that Frawley, it's just, some of these things are just, you couldn't make them up. But Frawley also, they never liked to get an interviewer close to him because he knew where all the bodies were buried in Hollywood, and he would tell it. So one day he finally was there, and they didn't get security to get this interviewer away, and so he asked Frawley, he said, Vivian Vance, no, he didn't say that. He said, you have been nominated 4 times for Emmys, and you've never won. Does that bother you? And he said, hadn't bothered me a bit. He said, I knew they didn't know what they were doing when they gave one to Vivian Vance. He was something else. One of my other favorites in television was Bill Cullen. Some of you may remember one of the greatest, to my mind, one of the 2 greatest game show hosts there ever was, mainly because Bill could do any kind of show. Bill was the host of the original Price is Right, before Come On Down, and back in the 50s and 60s, this was a show where the contestants were on stage and they'd bring the prizes out, and so the contestants would bid, and they usually make about 3 bids on the prizes before they would ring a buzzer and they'd say, okay, final bid. So on the Friday show, they would always give away something very, very big to wind up the week. So one week they were giving away as the final prize something that was, they really created the prize. And so it was like this. It was a trip around the world to see the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus in 4 different cities. And you had Don Pardo, the announcer. Of course, some of you remember him from Saturday Night Live, but Don was the announcer of just about every game show that rolled around. And he said, you have an opportunity to go to around the world to see the Ringling Brothers Circus in London, in Rome, in Brussels, and in Paris, and it can be yours if the price is right. I don't know how somebody had a voice that sounded like it was 300 degrees below sea level, but Don Pardo did. He was unbelievable. And so Pardo is describing what's going to happen. So the Ringling Brothers Circus happened to be in New York on that particular day. So they bring in the elephant from the circus. Now, you got to understand this. They always had a full audience on The Price is Right. So they bring it in and the audience is going, whoa, and so all of a sudden the elephant looks over and sees the audience and apparently gets a little disturbed. And finally they cut to a wide shot, and as they cut to the wide shot, the elephant decided to do what elephants will do on live television. They weren't taping this. This was live TV. And the director was so stunned that he froze and just left the camera shot on there and didn't go to his other shot, the close-up of the elephant. And the audience is in hysterics and the contestants are in hysterics. And so finally the director composes himself and cuts to camera 2, which is Bill's camera. Genius that he was, he just folded his hands and he said, tune in again on Monday when we'll have equal time for the Democratic Party. And Bill was something else. He did a show after The Price is Right went off, in 1966. He did a memory game called I Guess, where they would have this board and they would have 9 squares, and they would show you the board for about 5 seconds, and you had to remember. Bill would ask you a question, and you had to remember what square on the board was the answer. And one Friday, he had these 2 contestants that were the dumbest. I mean, you're talking about absolute bozos. They missed 11 questions in a row. The audience was in more hysterics with every single miss. And here you go. So Bill is going on, and finally they ring the bell and they say, time's up for today. And Bill said, well, we had 3 questions left, but you would have missed them anyway. Only Bill. I wanted to share with you very quickly before I get into some trivia, and then I'll wrap this up. One of the people that I've had the great fortune to, I'm doing a website about game shows for many years. I got an opportunity to interview many people that were affiliated with them, or actors or actresses who appeared on these shows. And one who has become a personal friend that is a delightful person, and is a Christian, and is somebody that I'm just very proud that she's 71 years old now, and I told her, I said, I'm going to tell this because you can tell people how old I am, even though they don't know who I am. Her name's Kathy Gardner, and Kathy played Sissy on Family Affair, the comedy of the 1960s with Brian Keith and Sebastian Cabot. And now that we have a network that's available to us here in town called Decades, that's on every morning, and now that I'm off for the summer, I'm watching it a lot again. But Kathy told me some interesting stories about, and one of the questions we talked about, she's written a book called Ex-Child Stars. One of the interesting things is she didn't have these kinds of issues, but the girl who played her sister, Anissa Jones, you may remember Buffy, who had the pigtails, and she had the doll Mrs. Beasley. Anissa Jones died at the age of 17. I remember I was a rookie reporter in Columbus, Georgia, and ripped the wire, and I looked, and I had to read it 3 times. 17-year-old Anissa Jones, who played Buffy on Family Affair, died of what was at that time the largest drug overdose in the history of the city of San Diego. It's so tragic. And I said, Kathy, why is it that so many of the child stars that we hear about had such troubled adjustments into the adult years? And she said, there are a lot of reasons, but the primary reason that you have for so many of them is the fact that for some of these performers, the parents used the child's income as their income. And if it was a child performer that they were, for whatever reason, typecast in the role, then the phone stopped ringing eventually. And they didn't get those same kind of roles. Some did, but many of them didn't translate into adult performers, and the parents oftentimes would turn on the child because they couldn't keep that income coming in. Paul Peterson, he played the son on the Donna Reed show back in the 50s. Paul has an organization called A Minor Consideration that's in California that lobbies for more money of child stars to be set aside in trust so that parents who would be stage parents could not swallow up that money. And they're also trying to give them more mental health counseling, other things to deal with the transition to adult life that may not include show business, because it's a very fickle industry. But I wanted to share that with you because a lot of people ask that question. Why is it that we've had some child performers like Ron Howard, like Jerry Mathers, who played the Beaver, that seemingly we never heard any bad publicity out of them? It's because they adjusted very well, but many didn't. And a lot of times it's because they had families that didn't exactly treat them as many of us would hope families would. Well, there are many more that I could tell you about, and if you ever ask me back, I'll tell you some more stories about these, but I want to play a little trivia with you here. I'll go for just a few minutes until you guys got to get away from here. And this is, the way I play this game, it's sort of like whose line is it anyway? The points don't matter. Everybody can just answer out as you please. So we'll do this for about 5 minutes or so. Okay, let's start right off here. Ralph Edwards created and hosted this show in which he surprised celebrities with their biographies. He used the name of the show to greet each of those stunned stars. What was the name of the show?
This is Your Life.
Thank you, Tommy. This is Your Life. Now we're going to surprise you with your life. Okay. Actress Betty Lynn is one of the few surviving members of this all-time favorite comedy. What role did she play on the Andy Griffith Show? Betty Lynn. She's one of the few that's still living.
Was that Andy's girlfriend?
Not Andy's girlfriend.
Barney's girlfriend.
Yeah, Thelma Lou. Yeah, Barney's girlfriend, Thelma Lou. That's right. You got it close enough, you know, when you play this. If you give me that, that's fine. Okay. On Gilligan's Island, this is one I don't think anybody here is going to get, but if you do, you deserve something. On Gilligan's Island, Gilligan was not the main character's first name. It was his last name. On one episode, his first name was revealed. What was it? Willie. Willie Gilligan. What a name. Okay. On To Tell the Truth, what did Bud Collyer and later Gary Moore ask the three contestants at the end of each game in order to reveal their identity? What did he say to them? There was a question he would ask. The panel had voted and the three contestants were there. What would he say?
Will the real somebody stand up?
Yes! You don't have to be embarrassed. You got it. That is exactly right. Will the real Charles Bird please stand up? Okay, on Bonanza, who played the brother Adam who left the show after the first 6 years?
Warren Roberts.
Who?
Was it Warren Roberts?
Warren Roberts.
Lauren?
Oh, no. Lauren Green was the star, but Roberts is right, but what's the first name? It's an unusual first name. Purnell Roberts, that is exactly right, who went on many years later to do Trapper John M.D. Purnell is from my hometown of Waycross, Georgia, and he sang in the Glee Club in Waycross High School with my mother, who lives here now. So that's one of the few connections I have with anybody. Okay, who played the lead character on the classic ABC medical drama Marcus Welby, M.D.?
Robert Young.
Yes, sir. Tommy knows his stuff today. All right. On Perry Mason, what was the name of his secretary? Della Street. That is right. Man, you need him on your team wherever you're at. Okay. What was the name of Perry's detective who investigated his cases?
Paul Drake.
Paul Drake. That is correct. All right. Now, this is a piece of cake. What series had a theme song that began with the lyrics, "Moving on up to the east side"? Jefferson's. Yes, that is right. On Sanford and Son, what was the name of Fred Sanford's son? Lamont. That is right. Yeah, Lamont, you better get out of here right now before I kill you. He could really do that. On My Favorite Martian, who played Martin the Martian? He was a well-known actor, but his name probably has faded from a lot of people's memory.
Was that the little boy?
No. Ray Walston. Okay, when John Provost became Timmy, the master of Lassie, who played his mother? She's a very, very attractive and very popular actress. June Lockhart. She's still with us. She's 92 now. Okay, who ended his weekly variety series from 1956 to 61 by saying, "Bless your little picking heart"? Tennessee Ernie Ford is right. This variety show host, who passed away last year, from 1969 to 71, ended his CBS show every week by singing an old Ernest Tubb song called "Tomorrow Never Comes." Who was he?
Tommy.
All right, I'm going to give you a clue on this one. He played on one of the all-time favorite classic sitcoms for 2 years, and then he was spun off into his own sitcom that was set in the United States Marine Corps.
Andy Griffith and Gomer.
Jim Neighbors, Jim Neighbors, that's it. All right, their last names were DeFazio and Feeney, and they opened their show every week.
Shirley.
Now, how about that? I was going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, Schlemiel, Schlemazel, Hassan Pfeffer Incorporated. What was the original theme song of the popular show Happy Days? the original theme song.
1, 2, 3, 4 o'clock rock.
Yes, Rock Around the Clock. That's right. Jeff woke up. Jeff just woke up on the guitar. Okay.
So say you got into the 70s.
All right, here we go. Which ran longer on television, The Andy Griffith Show or Matlock?
Matlock.
Right. Matlock ran 9 years, and The Andy Griffith Show ran 8. A lot of people don't realize that, but yeah, it ran longer. All right, let's do 3 more. On Leave It to Beaver, this character's real name was Clarence Rutherford, but what did everybody call him?
Lumpy.
Lumpy. Got to tell you a quickie on this one. We were at the Game Show Congress in 2009, and we were honoring Alan Ludden posthumously. And so Betty White came to the event, and I was the MC of the event. And so part of my job before it was there, sometimes you just luck into stuff like this. I had to take Betty White, and escort her to her seat. Of course, Betty was married to Alan Ludden. Well, Frank Bank, who was also passed away, who played Lumpy Rutherford, was there because he came mainly because he had never met Betty White before and he wanted to see her. And so as we're getting by, and Frank is sitting on the second row, and he looks over at her and he says, "Betty, I don't know if you know me or not, but I'm Lumpy." And you want to know how quick she is? Without batting an eyelash, she looked at him and she says, "Where's Eddie?" And he was stunned. I'm telling you, he was not expecting that answer. Oh my goodness. All right. Here's one. Andy Taylor and Helen Crump were married on the first episode of Mayberry RFD, the spinoff show. A year later, they came back to Mayberry for the baptism of their son. What was the son's name? Andy Jr. And when they did the reunion movie in 1985, Return to Mayberry, no mention was made of Andy Jr., who would have at that time been 17 years old. I guess they put him up for adoption because... All right, last one right here. This is one that is a commercial jingle that was all over TV for years. A sponsor of Gunsmoke in the 1950s had this jingle. "You'll wonder where the yellow went when you brush your teeth with..." Oh my goodness, I only wish we could have sung it together. You would have been great on key with that. This has always been fun for me to do this. I hope it has been for you, because one of the reasons people ask me from time to time, and they'll ask me, they'll stop me and they'll say, "I really love the show on Saturday and Sunday night." And the reason they always tell me is because it brings back so many memories of things that we thought we'd never see again. We don't have too many of those anymore because so much of the world is so turbulent. And I'm just glad that for 3 hours on Saturday and Sunday night, we can take ourselves back to a time that was gentler, easier, and brings a smile to our face. And if you can do that with people for just a couple of nights a week, it's not too bad. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, that's tough to follow up on. Thank you.
You bet.
We're very impressed. Very impressive.